I had to come to the bank today. And it wasn't about the point of coming to the bank because I'm satisfied with it. I know I read hard. And that about over with. I lost. So anyways, it's not about coming to the bank. But these people know me in here. And they know my personality. And we always talking everything. And if I said, what you did to your face? So I had to tell her that it wasn't me that did. And that to my face, it was my husband. That shot me in my face.
This woman was shot right on her face, but instead of being laid to rest, she was busy planning her shooter's funeral. This is the story of Ebony Mixon. The bullet should have killed her instantly. The doctor said it was a miracle she even made it to the hospital alive. Her family was preparing for the worst. But Ebony had other plans. While she was recovering from gunshot wounds to her face, the man who pulled that trigger was already 6 feet under. Alonzo Maria, her boyfriend, died on the exact same day he tried to murder her. The same day. Before we get into this insane case, smash that like button if you're ready for one of the most twisted stories we've ever covered on this channel. This one is going to blow your mind. Welcome to our channel, where we break down the most shocking true crime cases that will leave you questioning everything. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we always drop jaw-dropping cases like this. Here's a Facebook post Ebony made recently while motivating others. I've been to prison and lost everything. I've been through addiction and survived. I've been shot in the face, died, and came back. So when God brings you through and it's your season, make sure you tell them to stay prayed up and trust the process, just like I did. Now here's where this story gets absolutely wild. Most people would be celebrating their shooter's death, right? Most people would feel some kind of justice was served. But not Ebony. She did something that left everyone speechless. She showed up to his funeral. Not only did she attend, but she helped plan it. She picked out flowers. She made arrangements. She sat in that funeral home and watched them lower the man who tried to kill her into the ground. In fact, this was Ebony holding the dead body of her shooter and almost hugging him while he was in the casket. But why? What happened in that house on March 18th that led to this shocking turn of events? How did Alonzo end up dead just hours after pulling that trigger? And what drove Ebony to honor the man who destroyed her face? The truth behind this case will leave you absolutely stunned. Now let me show you how Ebony's face was before the shooting and how it turned after the shooting. Ebony Mixon wasn't your average woman. At her age, she liked to say she was way past grown. This wasn't someone who would run from a fight or back down when things got tough. Ebony had seen it all, been through it all, and she wasn't about to let anyone push her around. She was the type of person who spoke her mind no matter what.
Baby, when you go through the toughest times of your life by yourself and you make it through, it turns you into a beast.
If you crossed her, you'd know about it. If you disrespected her, she'd make sure you understood that wasn't going to fly. Ebony had a strength about her that came from years of handling whatever life threw her way. But Ebony's life wasn't simple. She lived in a house that was always full of drama. It wasn't just her and Alonzo Maria, the man she was in a relationship with. No, this house was packed with extended family members, and that meant constant tension. You had different personalities all crammed under one roof. Different opinions, different ways of doing things, and when you mix that many people together in one space, especially when money is tight and stress is high, things can get heated fast. Ebony's relationship with Alonzo was complicated too. They'd been together for a while, and like many couples, they had their ups and downs. But their relationship wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was playing out in front of all these family members, with everyone having something to say about everything. Alonzo was part of this chaotic household now. He'd moved in, and that meant he had to deal with all the family drama that came with being in Ebony's world. Some days were good. Some days were terrible. But that's how it was in their house. Ebony often talked about people playing games with her. She didn't like manipulation. She didn't like when people tried to be sneaky or underhanded. If you had something to say to Ebony, she wanted you to say it straight to her face. This was a woman who had survived a lot in her life already. She'd dealt with family problems, money problems, relationship problems. She thought she could handle whatever came next. But what was coming next would test every ounce of that strength she'd built up over the years. Because living in a house full of tension, with guns present and tempers running high, was like sitting on a bomb waiting to explode. And that explosion was coming sooner than anyone realized. Ebony and Alonzo's relationship was far from a fairy tale. What started as love had turned into something much darker and more dangerous. They were two strong personalities living under intense pressure, and that's a recipe for disaster. The fights between them weren't just regular couple arguments. These were explosive confrontations that would shake the entire house. Voices would be raised, doors would slam, and everyone else in the house would have to pick sides or try to stay out of the way. Alonzo had his own way of dealing with conflict, and it wasn't always healthy. When he got angry, he got really angry. And when Ebony got angry, she wasn't the type to just walk away and cool off. She would stand her ground and fight back just as hard. The family members living in the house could see what was happening. They watched these two go at each other over and over again. Some tried to intervene, others just tried to mind their own business. But it was impossible to ignore the tension that filled every room. And Alonzo had his own complaints about Ebony. He felt like she was always ready for a fight. He thought she was too aggressive, too quick to assume the worst about his intentions. The truth was, they were both right about each other, and they were both wrong. The house itself made everything worse. When you can't get away from someone, when you're always in each other's space, small problems become big problems fast. There was no cooling off period, no time to think things through, just constant contact and constant friction. Money problems added fuel to the fire. Relationship stress mixed with financial stress is a dangerous combination. Add in family members who all had opinions about how Ebony and Alonzo should handle their business, and you've got a powder keg ready to blow. The warning signs were everywhere. The screaming matches that went on for hours. The way they would try to hurt each other with words when they were angry. The fact that other people in the house were getting tired of dealing with their drama. Ebony thought she knew how to handle Alonzo. She thought she could match his energy and come out on top. She'd been through tough situations before and survived them all, but Ebony had no idea how deadly these games would become. Living in Ebony's house was like walking through a minefield every single day. You never knew when someone was going to step on the wrong thing and set off an explosion that would rock the entire neighborhood. This wasn't just Ebony and Alonzo's home. Multiple family members had moved in over time, each bringing their own problems, their own attitudes, and their own way of handling conflict. When you pack that many adults into one space, especially when everyone's dealing with their own stress, it creates a pressure cooker situation. The house had become a revolving door of drama. One day it would be Ebony and Alonzo screaming at each other. The next day it might be two other family members going at it over something completely different. And sometimes everyone would be arguing at the same time about different things. The neighbors knew exactly what kind of house this was. They'd heard the shouting matches that went on late into the night. They'd seen police cars pull up to the driveway more than once. This wasn't a quiet, peaceful home where people worked out their problems calmly. The police had been called to this address before, multiple times. Sometimes it was for domestic disputes between Ebony and Alonzo. Sometimes it was for other family conflicts that had gotten out of hand. The officers who responded were starting to recognize the address and the faces. Ebony knew about the guns. Alonzo knew about the guns. The other family members knew about the guns. Everyone in that house was aware that deadly weapons were within reach whenever tension started to rise. The arguments were getting worse and more frequent. What used to be weekly blow-ups became daily shouting matches. What used to be verbal fights were starting to include threats. The line between angry words and actual violence was getting thinner and thinner. Family members were taking sides. Some would back Ebony when she and Alonzo fought. Others would support Alonzo. This meant that their personal relationship problems were becoming everyone's problems. Every fight became a group event, with multiple people getting involved. The stress was building on everyone. Money was tight, which always makes family tensions worse. People were getting on each other's nerves just from being around each other too much. Personal space was non-existent. Privacy was impossible. Alonzo was feeling the pressure from all directions. He had Ebony challenging him constantly. He had her family members watching his every move and judging everything he did. He was living in a house where he felt like everyone was against him. Ebony was dealing with her own frustrations. She felt like Alonzo was disrespecting her in her own home. She was tired of the constant fighting, but she wasn't going to back down or let him think he could push her around. The other family members were getting exhausted from all the drama. They were tired of being woken up by screaming matches. They were tired of having to choose sides. They were tired of living in a war zone. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt the tension building, where you could sense that something bad was about to happen, but you didn't know exactly what or when? That's exactly what this house felt like in the days leading up to March 18th. Everyone could feel it. The anger was getting more intense. The arguments were lasting longer. The threats were getting more specific. And those guns were still sitting there, waiting for someone to make the worst decision of their life. Something had to give. And, unfortunately, it was about to. On March 18th, the tension in the house had reached a breaking point. What had been building for weeks, maybe months, was finally ready to explode. And when it did, it would change Ebony's life forever. Multiple 911 calls from the same house within hours of each other. The first calls came in earlier in the evening. Family members were reporting arguments that had gotten out of hand. Voices were raised, threats were being made, and people were scared. The officers who responded tried to calm things down, but you can't fix years of built-up anger and resentment in one conversation. Ebony was on the phone with police dispatch when everything went sideways. She was trying to explain what was happening in her house, trying to get help before things got completely out of control. She could hear the chaos around her, family members arguing, doors slamming, people moving around the house in a panic. The house was full of people that night. It wasn't just Ebony and Alonzo dealing with their problems in private. Multiple family members were present and they were all caught up in the drama. Some were trying to help. Others were making things worse. Everyone was on edge. But here's where this situation became deadly. There were 2 guns in that house that night. 2 loaded firearms within reach of people who were already past their breaking point. And one of those guns had already been fired. That's right. Before the shooting that would nearly kill Ebony, someone had already pulled a trigger. A gunshot had already gone off inside that house. The smell of gunpowder was already in the air, and somehow nobody had been hit yet. Family members were running around trying to hide cameras and recording devices. They knew this situation was spiraling out of control, and they didn't want evidence of what was about to happen. People were grabbing phones, trying to delete videos, trying to cover up what was going down. The chaos was unbelievable. You had multiple adults screaming at each other, police on the phone trying to figure out what was happening, guns being waved around, and everyone in a complete panic. It was like a nightmare playing out in real time. Ebony was still on the phone with dispatch when she saw Alonzo pick up that gun. She was trying to explain to the operator what was happening, trying to get help, trying to make sense of the madness around her. And then she made a split-second decision that probably saved her life. As Alonzo raised that weapon and pointed it at her, Ebony turned her head. Just slightly, just enough. The gunshot was deafening. In that small house with all those people present, the sound of that gun going off was like a bomb exploding. Family members screamed. Someone was crying, and Ebony was on the floor with blood pouring from her face. But she was still alive. Against all odds, despite taking a bullet to the face at close range, Ebony Mixon was still breathing. The bullet had hit her, but turning her head at the last second, had prevented it from being instantly fatal. The 911 operator could hear everything happening through the phone, the gunshot, the screaming, the chaos that followed. Emergency services were already on their way, but now it had become a race against time to save Ebony's life. Drop your location in the comments. Where are you watching from? Because what happened next in this case is something that people all over the world are still trying to understand. Alonzo had just shot the woman he claimed to love. Ebony was fighting for her life on the floor of her own home. And the night was far from over, because while paramedics were rushing to save Ebony, something was happening to Alonzo that nobody saw coming. Something that would turn this already shocking case into one of the most twisted stories you'll ever hear. Ebony was conscious, but in shock. She could feel the blood, could taste it in her mouth. She knew she'd been shot, but she was still alive, still breathing, still fighting. The family members who witnessed the shooting were screaming and crying. Someone was yelling for towels to try to stop the bleeding. Others were calling for more help. The house had turned into a scene of absolute chaos and terror. The 911 dispatcher could hear everything through Ebony's phone, which was still connected. The operator was trying to get information about Ebony's condition, trying to help guide the family members through what to do until paramedics arrived. Emergency responders were already on their way, but every second counted. Ebony was losing blood fast. The bullet wound to her face was serious, and there was no way to know what internal damage had been done. When the paramedics arrived, they couldn't believe Ebony was still conscious. Gunshot wounds to the face are often fatal, especially at close range. The fact that she was still talking, still responsive, was nothing short of miraculous. They worked quickly to stabilize her and get her ready for transport. The bleeding needed to be controlled. Her airway needed to be protected. And they needed to get her to a trauma center as fast as possible. As they loaded Ebony into the ambulance, she was still fighting, still alive against all odds. The doctors at the hospital would later say that turning her head at that crucial moment had saved her life. A few inches in a different direction, and this would have been a murder case instead of an attempted murder. But Ebony's survival was just the beginning of this twisted story. While Ebony was being rushed to the hospital with a bullet wound to her face, Alonzo was dealing with the reality of what he had just done. He had shot the woman he claimed to love. He had tried to kill her in front of multiple witnesses. And now he had to face the consequences. The police were already on their way to the house. Multiple 911 calls had been made, and now there was a shooting victim being transported to the hospital. Alonzo knew that his life, as he knew it, was over. What happened next in that house is still unclear. The family members who were present have given different accounts of Alonzo's actions after the shooting. Some say he seemed to realize the magnitude of what he had done. Others say he appeared to be in shock. Some even said Alonzo accused Ebony of being the reason he went to prison. So he came back and shot her. But one thing is certain. Alonzo Maria would not live to see another day. On the same day that he shot Ebony in the face, Alonzo died. The same day. Not weeks later, not months later, but within hours of pulling that trigger and trying to end Ebony's life. Alonzo thought he had murdered Ebony, so when the police came for him, he turned the gun on himself and ended his own life. The timing was almost unbelievable. In the span of just a few hours, this situation had gone from a domestic dispute to an attempted murder to the shooter's death. It was like something out of a movie, except this was real life, with real consequences. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the couple. Alonzo had tried to end Ebony's life, but instead he had ended his own. She was the one who survived. She was the one who would live to tell the story. When Ebony learned about Alonzo's death, she was still recovering from her own injuries. She was dealing with the physical pain from the gunshot wound, the emotional trauma of being shot by someone she loved, and now the news that he was dead. Most people would expect her to feel relief. Most people would think she'd be happy that her attacker was gone and could never hurt her again. But Ebony's reaction was much more complicated than that, because despite everything that had happened, despite the fact that he had tried to kill her, Alonzo had been a significant part of her life. and now he was gone forever. The question that everyone was asking was simple. What would Ebony do now? How do you move forward after surviving something like this? The answer would shock everyone who thought they knew her. Ebony's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The doctors had prepared her family for the worst when she first arrived at the hospital. Gunshot wounds to the face often result in permanent disfigurement, brain damage, or death. But Ebony was beating the odds every single day. The physical healing was just one part of her recovery. She had to relearn how to eat, how to speak clearly, how to function with the damage that bullet had caused. Every day brought new challenges, new pain, and new reminders of what Alonzo had done to her. But while Ebony was fighting to get her life back, she was also dealing with something that nobody expected. She was thinking about Alonzo's funeral. Most people assumed that Ebony would want nothing to do with anything related to her shooter. Most people thought she'd be happy he was dead and would want to forget he ever existed. But Ebony's mind was working differently. She started asking questions about the funeral arrangements. Who was planning it? Where would it be held? When would it happen? Her family and friends were confused by her interest, but Ebony had made up her mind about something that would shock everyone. She was going to attend Alonzo's funeral. Not only was she going to attend, but she wanted to help plan it. She wanted to make sure he had a proper send-off. She wanted to be involved in choosing the flowers, the music, the arrangements. The same man who had put a bullet in her face was going to get a funeral planned by his victim. The public reaction was immediate and intense. People couldn't understand how someone could forgive their attempted murderer. Social media exploded with opinions about Ebony's decision. Some people called her crazy. Others said she was too forgiving. Many questioned her mental state. Her own family was divided. Some family members supported her decision and said it showed incredible strength and character. Others thought she was making a mistake and that attending the funeral would only cause her more pain. The psychological complexity of Ebony's decision was something that even experts struggled to understand. Was this forgiveness? Was this closure? Was this some form of trauma response? Or was this something else entirely? Ebony herself tried to explain her reasoning, but it wasn't easy to put into words. She talked about not wanting to carry hatred in her heart. She talked about wanting to say goodbye properly. She talked about needing to see this chapter of her life come to a complete end. Some people saw her decision as the ultimate act of Christian forgiveness. Others saw it as a sign that she was still psychologically attached to her abuser. Mental health professionals had different opinions about whether this was healthy or harmful for her recovery. But Ebony didn't care what other people thought. She had survived a bullet to the face. She had lived through something that should have killed her, and now she was going to handle the aftermath in her own way, regardless of what anyone else believed was right or wrong. The funeral home where Alonzo's service would be held had never dealt with a situation like this before. They had the victim of an attempted murder wanting to attend and help plan her shooter's funeral. It was unprecedented. As the day of the funeral approached, everyone wondered what would happen when Ebony walked into that funeral home. Would she break down? Would she change her mind at the last minute? Would there be drama with other attendees who didn't think she should be there? Nobody knew what to expect, but Ebony was determined to see this through. The day of Alonzo's funeral arrived, and Ebony kept her word. Despite everything he had done to her, despite the bullet wound that was still healing on her face, she walked into that funeral home with her head held high. The other attendees couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was a woman who should have been dead, attending the funeral of the man who tried to kill her. Some people stared in shock. Others whispered among themselves. Everyone was trying to process what they were witnessing. Ebony's appearance told the whole story. The visible signs of her injuries were still there. You could see what that bullet had done to her face. You could see the evidence of the violence she had survived. And yet there she was, paying her respects to her attacker. Her emotional state was complex and difficult to read. She wasn't crying hysterically. She wasn't celebrating his death. She wasn't angry or bitter. She seemed calm, almost peaceful, like she had found some kind of resolution that nobody else could understand. When it came time for people to view the body and pay their final respects, Ebony stepped forward. She looked down at Alonzo lying in that casket, the same man who had pointed a gun at her face and pulled the trigger, the same man who had tried to end her life just days earlier. What went through her mind in that moment? What do you say to someone who tried to murder you? What do you feel when you're looking at your would-be killer's dead body? Ebony later said that she felt a sense of closure. She said she needed to see him like this to truly believe it was over. She needed to say goodbye to this chapter of her life, even though it had nearly cost her everything. The community response was mixed. Some people admired her strength and her ability to forgive. They saw her presence at the funeral as an incredible act of grace and humanity. Others thought she was making a mistake and that she should have stayed away. Local news outlets picked up the story and it spread quickly. People from all over the country were talking about the woman who attended her shooter's funeral. It became a symbol of forgiveness, resilience, and the complexity of human relationships. But for Ebony, this wasn't about making a statement or proving a point. This was about doing what she felt was right for her own healing and peace of mind. Ebony Mixon's story teaches us something important about the complexity of domestic violence in human relationships. This wasn't a simple case of good versus evil. This was a complicated situation involving two people who had a long history together, living in a stressful environment that brought out the worst in everyone. Domestic violence cases often involve this kind of complexity. The victims don't always hate their abusers. Sometimes they still love them, even after being hurt. Sometimes they feel conflicted about wanting justice while also wanting their partner to get help. Ebony's decision to attend Alonzo's funeral shows just how complicated these emotions can be. Her incredible resilience is something that stands out in this case. She survived a gunshot wound to the face that should have killed her. She recovered from injuries that would have destroyed other people. And she found a way to move forward that gave her peace, even if other people didn't understand it. What do you think? Was Ebony's decision to attend the funeral an act of forgiveness, closure, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below. And if this case shocked you as much as it shocked me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more twisted cases like this one.